Hey, we're going to be finishing up this morning a message series called Toy Stories. The movie came out about 4 weeks ago, but what we've been looking at are stories in the Old Testament part of the Bible that have been turned into toy sets for little kids to play with. And so this morning we're going to be talking about Daniel in the Lion's Den. So if you have a Bible or a Bible app, you can find Daniel chapter 6. I'm going to be looking at some verses from that chapter. A couple of months ago, the National Council on Aging at their website, it's called the NCOA, posted an article about the 3 top scams going on in the United States so far in 2019. The first scam was a Social Security scam, which tends to be on the top of the list every year. But what's going on this year is that they will call someone and say your Social Security number has been deactivated. They'll then give you a number to call. It's an automated system, and you're supposed to enter your Social Security number into that automated system to get it reactivated. And of course, once you've done that, they have all of your money and all of your identity and pretty much everything about you. The second most popular scam this year is one called the grandparent scam. In its particular form this year, that was around all the time too, folks will call somebody that they know has a grandchild who's a teenager or in their 20s and who's single. How they find that, actually you can find anything on the internet these days, right? And they will call and say that your grandson or granddaughter's been in a horrible accident, they need immediate money for medical treatment, you need to wire it to them or overnight it somehow to them. And they say on average, Americans are losing $9,000 a pop, the ones who fall for that scam. The third one that's most popular this year is called, and this one repeats every year too, is a disaster relief scam. And the way that one works this year is folks will call you and say if you've been hit by a disaster, they'll call and say that they are representing the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, and you have back taxes that you can get access to help you with the disaster. And of course, they get your personal information and then have your identity and all access to you. Just as an FYI, the Social Security Administration and the IRS never call people. They always send snail mail to you. Somebody's got to keep the post office going, so they send snail mail to you. And so, of course, you know that most of these scams, most of the time these scams are employed against older senior citizens, typically in their 80s or 90s, or people who are in a disaster. They're perpetrated against people who are particularly vulnerable. But the reality is that there are so many scams going on in the world today that pretty much any one of us in this room could fall prey to a scam. This week, it could happen. Remember a few years ago, I almost fell for a scam that would have cost me about $10,000 until my then 13-year-old son said, "Dad, this sounds way too good to be true. You need to make a couple of phone calls and find out about this." And I made a couple of phone calls, and Max saved us $10,000. Had I lost it, we would have been in a financial bind for quite some period of time. So you can be pretty savvy, pretty smart. I think I'm a pretty smart guy and can follow that kind of thing and still fall prey to a scam. As a matter of fact, you don't just have to be an ordinary sort of bright person. Even the most powerful people, who you would think would be some of the smartest people on the face of the earth, can fall prey to a scam or an evil scheme. That was the case with a guy about 3,000 years ago. His name was Darius. He fell prey to a scam, one of these evil schemes. Darius was the king of the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire had taken over the Babylonians. The Babylonians had taken over the Assyrians. So the Persian Empire was one of the largest empires the world had ever known up to that point in time. And so Darius, ruling over it all, is this really powerful guy. He's this really smart guy. And in the empire that Darius has inherited, living in that empire, there were some Israelites. These Israelites were not living in their homeland in Israel. They were living in captivity in other parts of the Persian Empire because decades earlier, they had been taken captive by the Assyrians and then the Babylonians and moved away from their homeland. Now, some of these Israelites who were living in captivity to the Persians and who had been living in captivity, the Babylonians and the Assyrians, some of them distinguished themselves. Some of them were very bright, very intelligent, very capable people that the Babylonians took them and trained them for different kinds of leadership positions. And one guy who was a young man when that happened to him was named Daniel. Daniel was super bright, super intelligent. He was well trained by the Babylonians, and Daniel spent most of his life serving in high-ranking positions to the emperors and other leaders of these empires that were holding him captive. One other thing that's important to know about Daniel is that even though he got involved in politics, so to speak, he remained relentlessly faithful to the God of Israel. He managed to be involved in leadership without ever forsaking the God of Israel. It's kind of amazing. He was just relentlessly faithful that way. Well, Darius, back to the king, Darius decided when he sort of inherited this huge empire, Darius decided that it would be really wise for him to not try to rule over it all just by himself. So Darius decided that he would break it up into 22 regions. Each one of those regions would be ruled over by a government official that was called a satrap or a satrap, however you want to say it. And then there would be 3 governors, and those 22 satraps would be divided in 3, and they would then report to these 3 governors, and the 3 governors would report to Darius. Well, Darius chose Daniel, who by this point was an old man, Daniel the Israelite, the captive. He chose Daniel to be one of these 3 governors because Daniel had so distinguished himself. As a matter of fact, Daniel, even as an old guy, so distinguished himself in service to King Darius that King Darius decided he was going to take Daniel out of his governorship and put Daniel in charge of the whole administrative structure. Daniel would oversee the 3 governors, he would oversee the 22 satraps, and all of the government system that was beneath that. That's how much he appreciated Daniel and how much Daniel distinguished himself. Well, the problem with this is Daniel's an Israelite. He's being held in captivity. He ought to be a slave. He ought to be living in a slum somewhere. And so these other governors and satraps become very jealous of Daniel, and they decide that they are going to plot to get rid of Daniel. It's like they want to get Daniel on some kind of scheme. They want to get Daniel in some kind of corruption, being negligent of something, so they can get him in the 24-hour news cycle and get Persia Today and the Babylonian news talking about him and ruin his career. And so they spend a lot of time looking for corruption in Daniel. They spend a lot of time seeing if they can just find him even being negligent of doing something that was the right thing to do, and they can find no corruption in him. Because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. They tried and they tried and they tried and they couldn't find anything. So finally, they realized that if they were going to get Daniel, they were going to have to put together a scam. They had to piece together sort of this evil scheme to get rid of Daniel. And so they all got together and they came up with a plan, and they then went to King with the scheme. They then went to King Darius to work the scam on King Darius. And this is what they said to him. The royal administrators have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, they were probably not suggesting that the people actually prayed to Darius. What is probably involved was that for 30 days, they were basically saying only Darius could pray to the gods for those 30 days. So that Darius was functioning as the mediator between the people and the gods on their behalf for that 30 days. Now, it's interesting that they said, the royal administrators, all the governors, all the satraps, the entire administrative structure have all agreed that the king should issue this edict. What a lie! Daniel was not involved in these discussions. Daniel, the king's most trusted, distinguished advisor, knows nothing about this, but they just told King Darius that even Daniel thinks this is a good idea. It's a really rotten idea, right? But they told if Daniel thinks this is a good idea, then King Darius is just going to go right on ahead and do this, because Daniel's always directed him in the right paths and had good suggestions for him. So if Daniel and all the rest of you are on board, then we're going to do this. And they basically said, well, here's the deal, King Darius. We don't just want you to say this. We want you to make this an edict, which means get it in writing. And this was all a part of their scheme. Because the Medes and the Persians had a law, it was an ancient law of their people, that once a king had put something in writing, it could not be repeated. Once it was in writing, it was the law for so long as that king was alive. Now that sounds kind of silly to us today, but if you really think about it, that law was helpful. It forced a king to think about something before he did it. It also meant that when a king did something that was for the well-being of his people, he couldn't take it back when it wasn't working out so well for him anymore. It's not actually a bad law, but in this case it worked as a part of their scheme because they knew that King Darius loved Daniel. They knew that they were going to catch Daniel in the crosshairs of King Darius and God. They knew that if they pitted a situation in which Daniel had to choose between loyalty to God or loyalty to Darius, he was choosing his God. But they knew that if Daniel did that King Darius, if he had just spoken the law, was probably going to try to back out of it because he really loved Daniel and appreciated Daniel. So they wanted to catch King Darius in a situation where once Daniel had violated this new edict, he had to do exactly what the edict said and couldn't back out of it. So that's what they did, and the king fell for it face first, so to speak. Wrote this edict up, and it became the law of the land for 30 days, irrevocable. Couldn't be reversed even by the king himself. Daniel hears about the law, and Daniel does not have a panic. Daniel does not have a panic about it. Daniel doesn't think he needs to join a political party. It's none of that. Daniel doesn't, to do away with it, he doesn't, he's just unflinching about this. He doesn't panic about this. Instead, he does what he's always done. He goes to his house. He goes up to the second floor. There's a big open window on the second floor that faces, would have been west from where he was, toward Jerusalem. And in the morning, as the sun is rising, in a window where everybody can see him as they go by, he gets down on his knees and he prays to the God of Israel. Around midday, he goes to the second floor of his house, kneels down in the open window toward Jerusalem where everybody can see him, and prays to the God of Israel. As dusk begins to set, he goes back to the second floor of his house, kneels down in the open window where everybody can see him, and prays to the God of Israel. And you just know that all the evil schemers were watching for this. If they were waiting for the moment to catch Daniel and tattle on Daniel. And they finally caught him doing this because Daniel wasn't doing it to be brazen or to put it in their face. He just wasn't going to stop doing what he had always done, which was praying to God 3 times a day in the open window of the second floor room. He just kept doing what he had always done. But they catch him doing it, and then they run to King Darius to tattle. Now, their tattling is really kind of interesting because before they just directly tattle on Daniel, they want to make sure that King Darius understands what a bind they have him in. So here's what they say. Didn't you publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? We're not quite sure. Our memory's faded a little bit, but we think just a few days ago you may have done that. Did you do that, King Darius? King Darius says, well, the decree stands. Of course I did, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which can't be repealed. I wrote it, it stands. It is what it is. Then they lower the boom on Darius. Well, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, Daniel, one of those Israelites that you should never have appointed to a position like this in the first place, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays. He still prays 3 times. He may have paid 3 times a day for something too, but he still prays 3 times a day. And at this moment, Darius realizes what a bind he's gotten himself into. He realizes that he's been scammed, that there is an evil scheme. Because the next verse tells us this: when the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Now, I don't know what every effort was. I suspect he may have done what happens in the United States today, where everybody goes to the laws they've written looking for a loophole to get through it. I'm sure he had his legal advisors looking for loopholes in this thing. Surely there's got to be something that allows a king to get out of a written edict. Find that for me. Maybe he tried to plot how to get Daniel the heck out of Dodge without anybody knowing about it, to help him escape. We don't know what he did, but he spent all day long trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. But then he gets a reminder that he's actually in a bind he can't get out of, because all of these satraps and these governors come back to the king, and it's like a remember we got you kind of moment. This is what they say: remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict the king issues can be changed. Give it up, Darius. We have cooked your goose, and Daniel's too. The deal is done. You have no choice now but to obey the law you wrote. You can't unbind yourself from a law you created. You don't have the sovereignty or the power to get yourself out of this situation. And so Darius, very regretfully, gives in. He's bound. There's nothing he can do to save Daniel or to save himself from this evil scheme or this scam. And so he has Daniel taken out to the lion's den. Darius goes to the lion's den. Would have been like a big pit with a small hole at the top, like sort of an underground cave that they kept these lions in. They lower Daniel into the lion's den, and then Darius says this, "May your God whom you serve continually rescue you." Now, that maybe Darius said that kind of flippantly, like, "Sorry, Daniel, did the best I could." I don't think he's flippant at all. I think Darius has come to a very important realization in his own life at this point. Darius has realized that he is bound up in a situation from which he cannot unbind himself. And he is casting all of his hope at this point on the God of Israel. He is hoping that the God of Israel can unbind him from a situation that he cannot unbind himself. And so he prays, "May your God whom you serve continually rescue you." A stone is rolled on top and it's sealed so that no one will know that it's been, they'll be able to tell the next morning that no one came and unsealed it and got Daniel out. Now, I wish at this point that the story gave us a minute-by-minute accounting of what happened to Daniel in the lion's den. Like, that's what I want to know. But the story instead tells us what happened almost minute by minute to Darius when he went back home. So it says this, Darius spent the night without eating and without any entertaining being brought to him, and he could not sleep. Darius had probably the most miserable night of his entire life. He's tossing and turning all night long. I kind of see him doing like this. "Oh, dummy, dummy, dummy. Look at what you did. You got your best advisor into a bind that you can't get him or yourself out of. Stupid, 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 stupid." And he's in a fit like that all night, while he's also imagining that Daniel, his best advisor, is like breakfast, lunch, dinner, and midnight snack to a bunch of lions. I mean, it is a miserable, miserable night for him. He gets up early the next morning to go back out. This is great. Darius, one of the most powerful men on the face of the earth, gets up early in the morning to go back out to the lion's den to see if the God of the piddly little Israelites has done something he couldn't do for himself. So he goes back out there and he has the stone rolled away. It's been sealed. It's obvious nobody's messed with Daniel overnight. He says, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions?" And then I think Darius would pray, "Please, please." And he hears a voice. It's Daniel's voice. Daniel says, "My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions." They haven't heard. That's the part where you go, amen. You guys got to tap into some African American blood here. Maybe. May God send his angel. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. I didn't lie. I didn't do anything wrong before God, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. I didn't disobey you. I'm innocent of it all. And so God shut the mouths of the lions. Now, I think there had to be just a moment where Darius is like, "Really? I went back to a luxurious master suite in the palace and had the most miserable night of my life, like to pulled my hair out. Look at what a wreck I am. While you were in the dark, dirty hole petting lions like they're a bunch of purring kittens. What is this?" I think there had to be that moment, but the text doesn't tell us he had that moment. Instead, Darius says this, or the text says this, Darius was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Darius, who had gotten himself and Daniel into a bind that he could not break, found out that the God of Israel can break any bind. God can unbind the bonds that you and I cannot break. Somebody said amen. Somebody said amen. God can unbind the bonds that you and I cannot break. You do realize that there are bonds that you and I can't break. I think this is an important word for a group of largely middle-class evangelical American Christians. There are bonds that are set against us that you and I cannot break. There are bonds that are set against us that no therapist, as much as I love therapy, trained as one, can break. You can see them for 10 years and they can't break. There are bonds that you can go and talk to the most wisest man on the face of the earth and read all of the Middle East, read all of the New Age Buddhist, Hindu self-help works you can find on the shelf at St. Joe's. Read them all, and they won't break some of the binds that you're in. There are binds that no matter what you and I do in life, we do not have the power to break them. And so it's really healthy for us as Americans, tamed up on individualism and the power to do anything we want to do, to understand that there are some things, bonds that are set against us that we cannot break. There are some bonds that are so strong that if you try to break them, you'll just die trying. Not a thing we can do about it. Paul, a few decades after Jesus' death and resurrection, planting churches all over the place, like a madman church planter, Paul writes about this idea of these bonds that we cannot break, and Paul uses a certain terminology to refer to them. Paul describes these things that bind us as the powers and authorities. Now, on one hand, when Paul says you're bound up by powers and authorities, that sounds like he's talking about human powers and authorities. It sounds like he's talking about the satraps and the governors in Daniel's case that got Daniel and Darius bound up. It sounds like he might be talking about bad government officials or corrupt businesses. It sounds like he might be talking about whole systems that just kind of seem to come against people and bind people up. And on one hand, Paul is talking about sort of all of these human systems and human groups and persons in the world who get people caught up in bind and even intentionally seek to bind them up. But Paul is very subtly and very quickly asking us to stop thinking about the way there are human systems and people who bind us up, to realize that beneath all of the people and all of the human systems that bind us up, there is a spiritual realm behind all of that. Behind every act of injustice or wrong committed against you or another person, there is not just another person or an evil system. There are spiritual powers and authorities. And this is why quite often when we work for justice, and we ought to, when we work for mercy, and we ought to, this is why even when we do something great and just, even when we see someone mercifully released from something, we've not quite accomplished the work of unbinding them entirely. Because we've unbound what has been created in the human realm, but there are bonds in the spiritual realm that we cannot break out of sheer human effort. We can't break them. So who can? Who can? Paul writes about powers and authorities. If we can't break the bonds they set against us, who can? It's one of my favorite Bible verses when you fill this out. Paul says, well, and having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. Here's the way to envision that. All of these spiritual powers and authorities, they realized what was going to be possible on God's earth through Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So they threw almost everything they had at Jesus, trying to get him dead on the cross. Like used it all up almost. Just getting him to the cross and to death. And then 3 days later, he got up. And they were spent. They were disarmed. It's always good for us to remember that as much evil as we think there is in the world, can you imagine how much more there would be if it weren't for God? You see, we think Satan rules the day, when in reality, since the cross, the powers and principalities have been limping along, just doing the best they could. But they're still plenty powerful. They still set bonds against us that can only be broken by Jesus. Jesus himself talks about this. Jesus says, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now, a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. In other words, Jesus saying, I'm the son. So if the son sets you free, you will be free indeed. In other words, whatever bonds the powers and authorities have set against you in the way that they work through other human beings and human systems, whatever bonds they have worked against you in your life, if Jesus gets involved in the middle of that, he will set you free. And if Jesus sets you free, you are free. The bonds are broken. I think it's helpful for us to think about these powers and authorities a little bit like the mafia. You know, like the mafia is run by the Godfather, right? But so that the Godfather remains largely unseen and can say he's a good citizen who's contributing to all the charities, he works through hundreds, if not thousands, of little criminal minions. So that when somebody gets caught committing the crime, all you see is the little minion who committed the crime. And the Godfather is sort of hidden behind all of that system. And when Paul talks about powers and authorities, he's saying very much the same thing. You see all of these things that happen when human beings hurt one another and through the evil of human systems. But behind all of that, there are powers and authorities that you don't see. And you can put the criminals in jail, but until you've dealt with the source of the power and authority, or you found someone who can deal with it, who can break the power and authority, you're just stuck with the bonds they worked against you. But then Paul says, but if you get Jesus involved in that, and Jesus himself says, you get me involved in what the powers and authorities have done to you. You let me get involved in the bonds set against you that you've never been able to break. I'll set you free. And when I set you free, you're free. Fully and completely. It's a book I read a couple of years ago called Just Mercy by Brian Stevens. It's a book I highly, highly recommend. Brian Stevens, an African American, he had gone to school at Harvard Law. Like, you have to be really smart to go to school, law school at Harvard. Smart guy. Comes out of Harvard and he plans on working in a big city somewhere, making a ton of money, doing big-time legal work. But he gets recruited into doing this brief stint for the Southern Center for Justice out of Georgia. It's a not-for-profit agency. There's not much money in not-for-profits. So he goes to work for them for a while. And what the Southern Center for Justice does is they, particularly in the South, they go back and they look at the cases of men who are on death row. And they try to discern what was the evidence here. Was the evidence rightly handled? Is there evidence that actually tells us this person was not guilty of the crime? So they can try to get that person off of death row before we wrongfully put someone to death. Now, Brian Stevenson was appointed eventually. He never left the Southern Center for Justice. He was appointed to the Alabama region for the Southern Center for Justice. You guys may not be aware of this. There are more African Americans that we now know who have been wrongfully accused of crimes and put on death row in Alabama than any state in the nation. It's an atrocious justice system in Alabama. Atrocious. Well, they start looking at one of these guys. There's several stories that are told through the book, but there's one that's woven through the whole thing of Walter McMillan. In the early 1980s, Walter McMillan was in his mid-20s. He was a businessman. Small business in Monroeville, Alabama, which is home of Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird. And he fell in love with a white woman who was 7 years his junior, and they had a tumultuous relationship. They were violent with each other. The whole town knew about it. They had a barrier anyway in having that relationship. Well, that relationship broke up, but not without the police being involved in it numerous times. And shortly thereafter, 2 women within about a week were murdered in Monroeville, and they hadn't had 2 murders back-to-back ever in Monroeville. And Walter, largely because of his relationship with this white woman that had been so tumultuous, becomes one of the suspects in these murders. They exonerate him from one of the murders, and they're going to exonerate him from the second one until one of the other suspects says he will put Walter in the scene of where the crime was committed. And so they turn from this suspect and go after Walter instead. And within short order, in that broken justice system, Walter is found guilty. He's put on death row where he stays for 10 years. The Southern Center for Justice, Brian Stevenson, is one of the first cases he gets handed, and he decides to go to the penitentiary and talk to Walter. He has extensive interviews to find out if these guys, do you think these guys are telling you the truth about their innocence? He became really convinced that Walter was telling the truth, and he started digging into all of the case history, through all of the files. And he found so many things that were in Walter's favor, but here was the clincher. This was the one that finally got Walter off of death row. He found that the local police department had set on alibi testimony. 11 African Americans in a white police suit who had all told the police when they first accused Walter of the crime that Walter couldn't have done it because at the exact same time he was at a fish fry with his mama at her church. And he was buried. And Walter goes to prison for 10 years on death row. And of course, this is found out, and the day of liberation comes. It's supposed to be a joyous day, right? Walter's getting out of prison. Justice has been done. But let me tell you guys something. It was a great day, except that there were bonds that had been worked against Walter that Bryans and Stephen, nor any judge on the Alabama Supreme Court could unbind with all of their power and authority. They could get it all collected. But bonds had been set against him by the powers and authorities through the human injustice committed against him that could not be broken by human systems. It could not be repaired by human systems. Walter tried to start his business up again. By the white community in Monroeville, he was seen as still a criminal and a murderer, and he couldn't make enough money off of the African American population still visiting his business in those days. Within 4 years of having been released from prison, Walter starts to show the signs of serious early onset dementia. Southern Center for Justice gets him in with some of the best specialists, and every specialist agrees this has happened to Walter because of all the trauma he was put through. See what I'm saying? There were bonds worked against Walter that all human authority, even when it came to a great point of liberation, could not undo. It's powers and authority stuff. Ruining human souls. I wish there was a happy ending to Walter's story. Then 6 or 7 years of being released, he had to go into a long-term dementia care facility. He died remembering nothing, which may have been a small blessing in 2013. I wish I could tell you that story differently. And maybe this is my wide-eyed optimism. I don't know. I have some of that every once in a while, especially when it comes to Jesus. I just wish I could tell you that at some point in time when Walter was released, someone had come to him and said, Walter, man, you got a lot of crap. You got a lot of stuff nobody can undo, man. And I know a guy named Jesus. Yeah, Walter. He'll dig deep. He'll unbind the binds you can't break. He'll do it, Walter. He'll do it. I kind of wish somebody had done that. I think it's relatively easy to do. Darius did it so easily it seems flippant to us in the story. Oh, Daniel, may your God rescue us both. Just a question. Just a little prayer. God, will you unbind the bind I can't break? So I want us to spend just a minute. I just want you to invite the Holy Spirit. Like some of you may never have done that before. So maybe it sounds hokey and spooky to you or weird to you. I just want to encourage you to give it a try. You just kind of where you're sitting. Like just breathe slow a couple times. Just say, come, Holy Spirit. Come, Holy Spirit. I can say, Holy Spirit, I'm going to breathe slow one more time. When I breathe slow one more time, I just want to breathe you in. I want to take you in. I'm inviting you. Let's take just a minute to do that before I share some words from our prayer ministers this morning.